Good evening.
Somewhere where it's quiet. So I can.
There's double trouble.
Had to get some teachers lined out.
Give me a haircut.
Sorry.
That might
One of the
give you more
teachers I
than
was
that.
lined out was, you know who? Tucking me away from Leslie.
Thank you, young man.
He talked before we leave tonight, so let me know.
Alright.
Okay, just move to Carl Junction.
Huh?
Just move to Carl Junction. Justin Gill.
All right. I'll add a couple of those to that. One is Darren is going to have his knee broke loose. It got stiff on him, and all of the scar tissue was causing him to not be able to bend it. So they're going to put him to sleep and bend it.
Ouch.
Yeah. So anyway,
Who's this?
Darren, the Maples. He had that sciatic nerve issue, and they finally got that figured out. But they gave him muscle relaxers. But anyway, he wasn't able to do his rehab, and it locked up. Nasty. Jeannie said it didn't hurt. I said, "Oh, that didn't hurt." She goes, "Oh, I was at 18." I said, "Well, he's going to have a little soreness, I think, at his age." So anyway, you keep him in your prayers. And I bring greetings from Bill Dykes. I got to see him today, and Bill and Loretta. They're really good. Bill says he doesn't want to come because he's coughing. He don't want people to think he's dying of COVID-19 in his humorous way, you know. But so we're glad to see that. Any others real quick? All right, let's pray. Father, we thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. Pray you'd bless this time. We're so blessed to be able to study your word. Pray you'd guide us. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. Well, how about you? Does anybody think that we're getting close to the end of times? What are you thinking? What do you think maybe be a good sign of what you're thinking in close to the end of times?
Well, for one thing, you know, all the writing and everything's going on, God has not given a thought. You know, it's just like right and wrong is really not an issue. Your moral and immorality don't seem to be an issue with people.
Yeah, they don't have a problem with it, is what you're saying, and that's because we've lost God in our country.
It's just complacency.
It's unbelievable. And it's, and it's, remember the passage that says everyone does what's right in his own eyes. It's exactly what we're feeling right now, is people doing whatever they want to do in their own eyes. But it certainly has been I always thought, the deception that we talk about in 1 Thessalonians that talks about that even that there would be a deception given to people. I thought, you can't lead these kind of people like that, but they are being led. People being led, and deception is just like that, so easily. I was just amazed how easily. And so this is where it kind of falls into what we're talking about in Revelation, because it's really going to fit. We're not really in Revelation, we're actually in Luke, but we're talking about the end of times. Okay? And so I guess what I'm saying is this becomes, a real, in a sense, contemporary, what we're talking about. This could be the time of course, go and talk to Bill Dykes doesn't help, he's ready, he's definitely ready and sees it coming, and I definitely can see where he's coming from on this. But God's in control, that's the key thing. We don't know what's going to happen, we know God's in control.
Well, since you've been over to see Bill, where's Israel playing?
Yeah.
He always keeps up with Israel.
Yeah, well, he has said that there's a great revival in Israel right now. He thinks there's a lot of people coming to the Lord, and he's excited about that, and I am too. So I'm hoping that that's a good sign, that some of those Jews that accept Christ will go in the rapture and won't be stuck going through what's happening in Israel right now. But I'll just tell you right now, our country has gone so far away from God right now. It's not even funny. I mean, we got guys that are working hard to try and get everybody back on track, but we're seeing the fruit of not being a nation that taught morals. And I mentioned I worked on my sermon a little bit for Sunday. And one of the things I was looking at some of the headlines, and one of them is that there was literally a sex club in New York City, and they had new COVID-19 rules for a sex club. And I'm thinking, I wasn't thinking COVID-19, I'm thinking, what is that? What is that? How do you even make that legal? But it's illegal like normal stuff for New York City. No wonder they're having trouble. They're that far away from God where it doesn't even affect them to have that. Blew my mind. That's the kind of stuff we're living in right now. Schmut kind of thing. And so we got to think about that. That we're living in this kind of a world. So makes this definitely contemporary to what we're talking about. This passage is Jesus talking about the future. He's talking about the future because he's asking the question. They asked him a question: when was the temple going to be destroyed, and when is this going to happen? And so Jesus begins to answer this question. He answers it in the book of Luke, in this chapter here, all the way through, the 21. He also does the same thing. It's the same answer that's in Matthew chapter 23 and 24. That answer is the same answer. It's just longer in Matthew because Matthew is very good at making long answers. So that's the same spot. Okay, it's also in Mark, but we don't really go much to Mark here. But this is talking about the future. Okay, and this is back in 21. Let's go there. And this was how it began. As we continue on there, it says, verse 20, and this is where I told you I'd start with this week, because we reviewed all the way to here to get everybody ready in the review. Now we came to verse 20. Verse 20 says, when you see Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, you will know that desolation is near. And let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are in the city get out. Let those who are in the country not enter the city, for this is the time of the punishment in fulfillment of all that has been written. How dreadful it will be from those days for a pregnant woman who's nursing mothers. There will be a great distress in the land and the wrath against this people. They will fall by the sword and will be taken prisoner to all the nations. Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. And so what do we do? What is going to be the signs? We start here. The key is we see, all right, now here's going to be a big sign when you see the armies getting around. So the people in the future, which are, guess what? That's us. All right, now this is not, we are the people in the future that Jesus is talking about. Now it may be the next generation, I don't know. I feel like it's just close. But this is the future. We've already seen things like natural disasters. Last Saturday, Trump was over in Tulsa, and an earthquake hit afterwards. So I thought that was interesting. I just thought that was just really cool. And because I believe God rumbles. He rumbles a lot. When Jesus Christ was died, the earthquake, darkness. Resurrection, earthquake. So I believe this. But anyway, having said that, we're those people that are here. And so how are we going to know when it's time? Okay, what are we going to know? And this is the answer that he's given here when he goes to this place. He says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by the armies and recognize that the desolation is at hand. Now that's the key for the future people to recognize when this is going to happen. Okay? Now when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then you recognize this. You say, wait. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, now if you think about that for just a moment, if you know your history about the Jews, that's a pretty normal thing to see Jerusalem surrounded by armies. Okay? Just seems to be, it was constantly going on. This has been a familiar sight. Certainly 40 years after this, they had that. 70 AD, Jerusalem was surrounded by the Roman army, okay, who laid siege to the city, which finally fell around 70 AD. So this is 40 years from now, we're going to hear this, okay? Now, when the city of Jerusalem fell in 70 AD, people did flee to the mountains. Thousands of them fled to the mountains. Many more traveled to various parts of the earth, in that way. Very horrible days at that point. Titus Vespasian was the guy who was there. He's the son of one of the emperors, Vespasian, who came and he attacked the city and he killed the people until Josephus said that he had no more people to kill and no more people to plunder. That's how bad it was for them. Okay, and then Caesar sent orders to demolish the whole city. He flattened it, he demolished it, he flattened the temple, just left a portion of the wall when he left there. The same, some of the towers were there. He left some of the towers there because he wanted to make a testimony that Rome did this, okay, in that way. And that was, pretty amazing what he did there. Josephus says that there was nothing left in the city to make those that come after them to believe that there was even a city there. I mean, it was pretty bad, okay. Is this what the Lord's talking about? Is he talking about 70 AD here? Well, that's what we're going to investigate tonight. We're going to decide whether he's talking about just 70 AD and it's all done, okay? Now, that goes, verse 21, let those in Jerusalem flee to the mountains, let those who are in the city depart, let those who are in the country not enter the city. And then it says, because these are the days of vengeance, in order that all things which are written may be fulfilled. At that point, we separate, we find out that language doesn't say 70 AD, okay, by going to this that way, okay? These are not the days of vengeance that we see talked about in the Old Testament, okay? The days of vengeance is a phrase of the Old Testament expression used to describe the coming of the tribulation, the time of the tribulation. It is the Old Testament expression to speak of divine vengeance from God in the end of times, at the time of Jacob's trouble, which is talking about the last days, okay? You read about the days of vengeance, Isaiah 34, 35, Isaiah 61, Isaiah 63. It's also Daniel 12, chapter 1 talks about the days of vengeance. Hosea chapter 9 talks about it. Micah chapter 5, Zechariah chapter 12, Zechariah chapter 14. This is talking about the final end, okay? God's final vengeance falls on the ungodliness of human history at this point, okay? And so this is the days of vengeance which was written about as all going to happen. Now, when all these things which are written become fulfilled, this is far more than just what happened at 70 AD, although that was traumatic, no doubt about it, okay? Now, what are we talking about here? Well, some say that we might be talking about the Middle Ages. Now, why would they say that? Well, because Israel and Jerusalem's always being attacked, okay? In the Middle Ages, the first crusade came in 1095. When they came through, they sacked Jerusalem when they went by. That's just how the crusades went. From 1500, the control of the city went from Jerusalem changed many, many, many times for 500 years, until finally one guy who was an Ottoman sultan conquered Jerusalem about 1500. So you get that they're always doing this. The battlement encircled the city of Old Jerusalem belonging to the 16th century, very visible. It is a reminder that Israel has been surrounded by armies throughout history. This is almost 500 years they were constantly being surrounded by armies. So Jerusalem has the history of this. I think the history of that's because of the rejection of the Messiah. They rejected the Messiah. You looked at, one of the reasons why we are a nation, and Columbus came over here in 1492, was because the Spanish, wasn't it, stole all the money from the Jews. They ran the Jews out of Spain, and they took all their plunder and helped finance that trip.
Oh yeah, they did a lot more than that. They killed the Jews, they burnt the Jews alive, they took all their plunder and sent them out penniless. Then they took that money and paid for the Columbus trip to America.
So you understand, this is something that happens all the time with Israel. But it's like Hitler. What do you say? You guys ever watch, probably, a movie one time I watched where the guy just looked in the phone book just randomly and pointed to a name, I'm gonna kill that guy, random. You think that about the Jews, because Hitler killed the Jews. It wasn't random, it's satanic, is what I'm saying. Satan is wanting to get rid of the Jews. But now, You could say today, couldn't you, that Jerusalem is surrounded by armies? Not necessarily around the city wall, but, you've got, 1948, they became a country again. They became a nation. And so you got Israel starting that way. In 1967, there was a 6-day war. In that 6-day war, they captured the old city of Jerusalem, okay? And they reunified all of Jerusalem. Then the city came under Jewish control for the first time in centuries in 1967, after that war, okay? Now, here we are, these years later, Jerusalem's still surrounded, okay? There's constantly, we've seen, one thing about it, Israel's not in the news very much right now because of everything else. There's a lot of things that aren't in the news that are going on that would probably shock you, is what I'm trying to tell you. You look at the news, and if you try to dig deep, I look at the Israel Daily News, I don't know what it's called, but it's Israel something, and I get, there's things going on all the time over there. But anyway, is that what it's talking about? Is it talking about now? Well, are we there, is what I'm trying to say, in that sense. There's several things, we've got nuclear weapons. I'm always interested in that prophecy of Damascus being gone. That in the last days, it'll be no longer there. Damascus is going to be destroyed. We don't know exactly how that's going to happen, but this was one of those prophecies that, look at it now. Damascus is about torn up now, isn't it? Yeah, it's about gone. But it's not talking about what's happening today in Jerusalem, okay? And to answer this question, we got to go to Matthew 24. So put your pencil there on 21. We'll drop back there if we have time. But I want to go to Matthew chapter 24 because it records what the Lord said about this more specifically, okay? There's a lot of places in the Gospels. You have Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and they are called what? They're called the synopsis, right? Synopsis gospel. They're all the history of Christ. They go, you go to Matthew and Mark and Luke, you're going to find passages that Jesus says the same thing, okay? John's a little different, right? John is more about Jesus being deity. And he talks about, from John, from very early on in the book of John, he starts in the last week of Christ. John 17, you're already talking about the prayer that he prays at the Last Supper, okay? So John's a different book. John starts out his book differently, doesn't he? In the beginning was the Word was God, the Word was with God, the Word became flesh. Verse 14, chapter 1. That's what John does, okay? And so what you're getting in the Gospels is, this is what in Matthew saw, Mark, he wrote, probably because he got Peter helping him read it, help him write his book, okay? Then you have Luke, and Luke is getting it from, the history. He's a history guy, he's a doctor, he's real, specific, probably questioned people, maybe even did a little bit of Peter as well. But this is a parallel passage, okay? In other words, it's the very same event, the very same time in Jesus' ministry, and this is what Matthew says. Matthew chapter 24 is where it gets very specific, is what I'm trying to say, as you go through this, okay? Now, if you look at, I'm looking at, up here at verse 15, and it is the, so when you sit, you're standing in the holy place, the abomination that causes desolation, spoken through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand, then let those in Judea flee to the mountains. Okay. In other words, he adds one thing in there that is, let the reader understand. Okay. And he goes through this whole part of this, all the things that we read on Luke already. Okay, you get that? You see how that parallel passage is right there? But he adds that part about Daniel. Okay. This is what launches the Great Tribulation. It is in the midpoint of the seven. We have the tribulation, 3.5 years, 1,260 days. And then you have 1,260 days of the Great Tribulation. In the middle of it is what we're talking about, okay? When you see the desolation that the prophet Daniel spoke of, okay? So there is that same passage. Jesus is talking about something that Daniel's talking about, All right, so this is where we know that he's not talking about 70 AD or the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages or even now. He's talking about that in the middle of the tribulation, the 3.5 years, there is going to be a desolation that's going to happen in the midpoint, okay? It's also in chapter 12 of the book of Revelation. You can write these numbers down if you want to. And by the way, in a couple weeks I'm not going to be here, not next week, but the next week after that. I've asked Charles to go through the book of Daniel and show you this. Okay, so he's going to do the Daniel part of this study. He's going to take that and he's going to show you what Daniel said. He's going to show you what Jesus is talking about. All right, so that'll be the week of after the 4th. So it'll be like the 7th or 8th that you'll see on Wednesday night. But anyway, what triggers the last half of the tribulation, or the worst half of the tribulation, just prior to Christ's return, is what Daniel calls the Abomination of Desolation. Okay? Jesus is very specific about this. So, this is what he's saying to the readers. The guys that are in the tribulation time, and by the way, we're not there. We are raptured out at the beginning, all right? And at the midpoint of the tribulation, for the Jews to understand that, by the way, we're talking about the Jews now. The Jews are the ones that are reading this. They're going to read this, they're going to say, okay, when is the Lord coming back? And they're going to say, when we see the abomination of desolation, we need to split. That's what he's saying. We need to get out of here, all right? Because this is a sign for you to know, very specific. He's relating Daniel's prophecy of the abomination of desolation to the end of times, okay? Now, again, he's answering the same question that they asked. Remember that? Look at verse 24, or chapter 24, verse 1. Jesus left the temple and was taught walking away when the disciples came up to him and called attention to the buildings. Blah, blah, blah. Look at these beautiful buildings, he said. And then Jesus said, do you see these things? I tell you the truth. Not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down. And then they asked the same question. Tell us then, what will this happen? Will it be the sign in? In other words, it's the very same question that we just talked about in Luke. It's being asked here. Jesus gives a little more, or Matthew gives a little more details to let us know that what he's talking about here is not 70 AD. All right? It's talking about the end of times, okay? And so when you see the abomination of desolation, you know that the time is near, okay? This is the end of times. Now, right after after that, verse 29 comes, and it comes the tribulation in its final form. If you look at that, it says, oh boy, it says, immediately after this distress, okay, immediately after what? The abomination of desolation. 3.5 years in the tribulation. Immediately after that, what happens? Well, then it shows the moon, the sun will darken, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from the sky, heavenly bodies will be shaken. This is all eschatological, end of time study here. In other words, what he's saying here is that this is what's going to happen in the last part of the tribulation. Because, let me tell you, at the beginning of the tribulation, you know, you're going to see a peace treaty given to Israel. You're going to get to that 3.5 years. At 3.5 years, if you had a stopwatch, as soon as the Antichrist goes in the temple, claims himself to be God, you can get a stopwatch and go 3.5 years. You know what I mean? 1,260 days. You can do that with a stopwatch at that point. And that's what Jesus is telling these Jews. That's when you know that this is when, and you know 3.5 years from that, what's going to happen? Jesus is coming back. That's when the birth pains reach their climax. That's when they go bang, bang, bang. That's we talked about that 7 years. The seals are spread over the 7 years. In the midst of all those is the bowls that comes out there, the trumpets. They're going, the latter part, the last part of that, of this 3.5 years gets really crazy, insanely crazy. And that's the point that he's making. But he's talking about the period of the end of history. Okay? And so he says when they come and encamp around Jerusalem with the purpose of desolation, that means that there is going to be destroyed. It's going to be destroyed. Okay? Very, very specific. Desolation. Basically, it's exactly what Jesus says about the abomination of desolation. Now, again, I'm going to give that to Charles to talk about that in the book of Daniel in a couple weeks, okay? That's Daniel chapter 9, 27. And he will talk about that to show us, there's an amazing thing, but Daniel talks about the reign of Gentiles, right? You start out with the four different, you have the Babylonian Empire, you have the, what's the next one? Persian Empire, then you have the Greek Empire, and you have the Roman Empire. He tells about that in the book of Daniel. It's very specific. And then he goes into saying, all right now guys, we're going to talk about the Jews for a while. In other words, he changes gears. He talks about the Jews from then on, okay? He doesn't talk about the church, does he? He skips the church age. He goes right into the Jews. And so the point I'm making is that this book, this Daniel is really, puts it all together for us as we start looking at this. But this is, there's going to be a time in the Great Tribulation that is unlike any other time in history. A great tribulation, one that the world has never seen before. And, you know, we've seen some pretty amazing things in this world, haven't we? You think about it. You know, I'm always amazed when I read stuff about World War II and the slaughter of the Jews. And how, by the way, if you want to know something really interesting, look at how the German people did socialism and how they became Nazis. And very few people were Nazis to begin with, but they just kept lying and growing, and then look what happened. You know, it's people can be led, and this is what they did. They led these people this way. But this is, we look at that and we think that's a terrible time. This is going to be, in fact, it says, is it Zechariah? Or Daniel? These days hadn't been shortened. Or is that Roman? I keep mixing up where it's at. If Jesus said that, if these days were not shortened, no one would survive. I mean, that's the idea. It's that bad. People are going to die wholesale. And so, you know, this is goes constantly through this and how this happens. But Daniel talks about all this. Daniel is very specific about what happens during that time. So the Lord sees this as an end-of-time event. This is not talking about 70 AD. It's not talking about all the other times. He's talking about the last 7 years, okay? Daniel talked about, there is the 59 weeks, right? The 60 weeks, and we did 59, and it's the last one. 69 weeks, and the last week is the 70th week, and it hasn't happened yet. We got a hole between the 69th week, which is the day that Jesus was crucified. You know, that's when he went into Jerusalem to be crucified, and that was when it says that they killed, Daniel says they killed the anointed one. That's what happened. In the end of the 69th week, they killed the anointed one. And now there's a break in here. Then we have a 70th week that's after that, okay? So, Daniel talks about this. Jesus makes very clear that's what he's talking about. And then he says, you know, let the reader understand, okay? And so the ones that are going to be reading this are going to be those, hopefully, during the time of the tribulation, they'll have this down. They will be able to read this and know this. Any of you ever see the Left Behind series? You guys see that? You guys too young to see that? Did you guys see that Left Behind series? Did you see it? Okay, you need to watch it. You need to get your son that. I'm looking at these age, I'm going, I think they have probably seen it. We've probably seen it, haven't we? We've seen it all the way through, but the Left Behind books, that kind of thing. You know, it's very specific. Some of the guys that are left, they get the Bible out and they just go through the whole list, don't they? But what's going to happen? This is going to happen next. It's going to happen next. Obviously, it's a man-made thought that they did it that way. I mean, it's not totally biblical. The whole book is more of a entertainment than it is biblical. But it gives you an idea that I believe the Jews are going to be getting this. You know, it says that they're going to, if they're listening to the Word of God, they're going to book when this happens. Okay. Back to Luke 21 quickly. All right, we're going to go back there. Now, this is what's going to happen in the days of vengeance when all these things are going to be written. Okay. Now, again. Charles will be spending time talking about the part that happens, and Daniel is so so written out so clearly that they thought Daniel was written after the fact. It's so clear. I mean, it's like, oh, no, that couldn't be because, you know, it's so precise. I mean, you can do the math. He gives numbers, you can do the math, and you can find out the exact time that Christ came in Jerusalem. It fits the math perfectly. That's why they said, oh, there's no way. It had to be written after Christ's death. No, it was written, we found a manuscript that has the dating that fits that way. So the bottom line is, Daniel's just amazing, and it just fits right into Revelation, okay? But that's what Jesus is talking about. But he says this, woe to those, he says, Luke 21, as you go there, it's very clear, he says, oh boy, it's going to be tough, he says, woe to those, he said, that are with child and who nurse and labors in those days. Why does he want everybody to run? And why does he want everybody to flee? Okay, well, because what's about to happen is beyond explanation. Almost, it's just beyond explanation what's going to happen, and he doesn't, he wants them out there. I read in Revelation that 2/3 of the Jews are slaughtered, right?
That's
Zechariah. 2/3 of the Jews are slaughtered. That's a lot of people. Okay, I don't know what the population of them they are right now, but 6 million was a lot. But they're going to slaughter more than that in the final days. So there's going to be a remnant left, and they're going to be the ones that flee. Now, when they flee, they're going to get protection out in the wilderness. I mean, this is the way Revelation is there. But and then after they flee, and God protects them, what does the Antichrist do? He goes out and kills Christians, wholesale, slaughters them. And those are the martyrs that you see in Revelation going, when, oh Lord, are you going to avenge us, avenge our blood? It all fits together. It's kind of interesting how it fits together. But when the Jews flee Jerusalem, the Antichrist gets furious because he knows God's protecting them miraculously, and he goes out and slaughters Christians. And this is when you have all these that are martyred underneath the throne, saying, "How long, O Lord? How long?" That's in Revelation that they say that. Okay, but this is a couple things that are going on. By the way, there's some good things about this and bad things. One of the good things is that there's going to be evangelism going out. I mean, 144,000 of the Jews from every nation, every tribe are going to go out and evangelize. I think that's why a lot of the Jews accept Christ. They began to evangelize. I believe they are led off, they start out by the two witnesses that are in chapter 11 in Revelation who witnessed about Christ. They're killed. What happens to them?
They lay in the street for 3.5 days, and they come back to life.
The 3.5 days, they're there, and all of a sudden they wake up and go up in heaven, and I think the whole world sees them, and then they're scared to death. In fact, when these witnesses die, this is how, I thought this is sick, but I can see that looking at our world today. They gave gifts. Happy Dead Witnesses Day. It actually says they give gifts in Revelation. They exchange gifts because they're dead. They're so happy that they're exchanging gifts with people. That's sad, but I believe it.
They have tremendous power. I think they can call down fire from heaven and things.
Anytime you mess with them, fire comes out of their mouth and consumes you. That's a lot of power there. That's what they did. But they killed them. The Antichrist kills them. Prophet or anyway, the Antichrist kills them. But then they raise from the dead, go up into heaven. From that, we have this great revival. People talking about Christ in that way. But at the 3.5 years, the evangelism, I believe, is kind of over. This place is going to go. The whole world is going to explode. The things are going to start happening because that's when all these things start getting really, the birth pains are coming like rapid fire at this point, okay, in that way. Now, birth pains, they're getting ready to birth the Savior. Jesus Christ is coming, that's the point. And that's what he's saying here. But he says, I want you to leave. God wants to protect certain people in order to, for them to enter to the millennial kingdom that are there. It's time to get out, and obviously, if you're pregnant, you can't move very fast, okay? If you have a kid that you're nursing, you can't move very fast, that's what he's saying. And so he's hoping that, pray that you're not nursing, so that's what he's saying there. So there's a great distress, a great wrath is coming. And here's a question I want to ask you. There will be a great distress in the land, and wrath against his people. They will fall by the sword, they will take prisoners to all the nations. Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. Now, question is, what are the time of the Gentiles? What is he talking about?
First of all, I think this passage has a double meaning.
Huh?
I think it's a reference to the time that Jerusalem falls in 70 AD, and it's also a time here when you get down to the times of the Gentiles. It's a reference to Israel will depend upon the Gentiles until they turn to Christ, or till the nation accepts Christ. They begin when Nebuchadnezzar took over Judah from the imprisonment, and they will end whenever Israel, that 1/3, accepts Christ, and that's when he comes back and steps in and saves them.
Right. And I think that, it has a double meaning, but it also, this didn't end the reign of the Gentiles, did it? The 70 AD, at the end of 70 AD, the Gentiles still reigned till the end of days. They'll continue to reign till the 3.5 years into the tribulation. So it has a double meaning, but it's certainly it says until it's fulfilled. The fulfillment is then, is the point. So it has to have a double meaning.
Sure. And there are those who think that the end of the reign of the Gentiles is whenever the Antichrist comes, but I think it is when Israel accepts Christ as their Messiah, the Son of God. Then Christ comes back and that ends the reign of the Gentiles.
Yeah, and it, the slaughter is wholesale on Gentiles too. The bowls and the trumpets and all those things kill people wholesale. It's a bloodbath. In fact, at the time of the armies, aren't they 3.5 years? They're surrounding Jerusalem. The army. God slaughters that army, the first one, right?
Yeah, it's all the nations. It's
In the Armageddon. And it says that the blood was up to the bridle of the horse. That's a lot of killing. And those are all Gentiles out there that are surrounded. So what I'm saying is that it is going to be definitely a reign, end of the reign for them as well. But, Zechariah 12, that talks about that. It said, it is the burden of the word of the Lord concerning Israel. Thus declares the Lord, He stretches out the heavens, lays the foundation of the earth, and forms the spirit of man within him. Behold, I am going to make Jerusalem a cup that causes reeling to all peoples around, and when the siege is against Jerusalem, it will also be against Judah. And, basically that's a way of saying it's all the way through the land. But that's in Zechariah 12. Then he says, it will come about in that day that I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all people. All who lift it will be severely injured, and all the nations of the earth will be gathered against it. In that day, declares the Lord, I will strike. Okay? And that's not talking about 70 AD here. This is talking about, because the Lord didn't strike at 70 AD, is the point. You know what I'm saying? He didn't destroy it, the Gentiles then. Okay? The siege of Jerusalem is the very one our Lord is referring to, is the one that Zechariah is talking about. Okay? Zechariah 14, I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle. The city will be captured, the house will plundered, the women ravished, and that's why they need to run. Okay? Half of the city exiled, the rest will not be cut off from the city. The Lord will go forth and fight against those nations as He fights in the day of battle. Great conflict. At the end is where the Lord comes down and brings the final victory. He comes in that white horse. The armies of heaven come with Him. This is what's going to end it. Okay, that didn't happen in the time 70 AD. Didn't happen back in the time of Antiochus. That's back during the time after Daniel was in. During the time of Daniel, during that time when the Greeks came, right? It didn't happen that time. he's talking about the end of time, okay? And then he says, it would be, so the Lord lays it out for us here. He says that it would be, things would escalate. We would have all these different kinds of destructions. We'd have earthquakes. We would have famine. All these things. It's getting worse and worse. But in the last days, as I kind of went through this, it gets worse than ever. You know, earthquakes. One earthquake in the last time is going to level the islands. They're going to sink down. All the mountains will go down. Jerusalem very possibly could be the highest place on earth at that point. That's the kind of earthquake we're talking about. Not a little shaker here. Not a 4.9 or not even a 9.8. It's going to be a big one. That's going to happen in the times. And what he's doing is he's showing the people that are there. This is a prophecy for them to see, to be ready, that when they see that happening in the last days, they need to absolutely be ready to flee, is what he's saying. And this is what Jesus tells them about here. Now, again, you know, can you imagine what will happen the day after the rapture in the world? The day after. Can you even imagine? We talk about economical destruction, just like that. You know, this is they're you know, you talk about things that people scratch their head and wonder what happened. You know what I mean? It's gonna blow your mind. I would hope that there are a lot of Christian airplane pilots and people driving their cars. Those cars are all gonna be crazy. You know, things like that's gonna happen whenever we're raptured out. Okay, it's going to be a disaster on this earth. They're gonna know something's going on. Okay, and hopefully during that time they're going to get out the Word of God and start reading this. You know, putting this together. You know, I have what was it? What's the guy that was Liberty University? Who did that? Jerry Falwell. He's got a recording that he's out there that if you look on it, Jerry Falwell has a message for those that are left behind after the rapture. Did you know that? He actually got a recording. This is what's going to happen. He gives it out for them, lets them very clear. You know, you would have to be blind. And hopefully, it's like now, you know, we have people that are really interested in the gospel right now. You know, people that I've never been able to talk to have been asking me questions, you know, because of, you know, what's going on in the world. Just think what's going to be back then, what's going to be like then. You know, they're going to want to know answers and see what's happening. But when you see these things, is when you need to run, okay? And it starts in verse 20, okay? And it describes that time in history that God says a vengeance is going to happen, all right? So, that's what he talks about here. And then he says a couple things. And we're not going to go, but we're going to start at 25 next time. But, you know, it kind of shows you some of the things that are going to happen. You know, there will be signs in the sun, the moon, the stars. On the earth, nations will be in anguish and perplexity of roaring and tossing of the sea. Men will faint from terror, apprehensive of what is coming into the world. For the heavenly bodies will be shaken, and at that time you will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with power and great glory. And when these things begin to take place, stand up, lift your heads, because your redemption draws near. Okay, now, that all fits what we're talking about here, okay? And then he starts with a parable, and that's where we'll work on it next time we're here together, okay? Any other comments on that? It is a huge passage, and it took time to get through it, but it is a definitely would be contemporary to what we're talking about today. All right, let's pray. Father, we thank you so much for all you do, and I pray that you'd bless this time. Father, help us to be prepared for what is coming into our world. And I pray, Father, that you would help us to prepare by sharing the gospel with everybody we see, to let them know about the hope that we have in Christ. And it's in his name we pray. Amen.